Hi YouTube, it's Titty Guyana. Thank you guys for being my first video, and thanks for all the positive comments I got back on that one. Today I'm going to talk about Easter. It's about a week after Easter holiday, and I just want to share my thoughts on Easter celebration period. I wrote down a lot, so I'm just going to read what I wrote down, and you guys can comment on it. Please do make comments, and if anything that I did misrepresent or that you do not agree with, please leave a comment, and we can have a discussion from there. So, as we all know, Christians observe Easter to celebrate Jesus' resurrection from being after being crucified on the cross and rising on the third day. The time all these miraculous events happen really coincides with the vernal or the spring equinox of our solar system. The spring equinox is when one of the days of each year when the daytime and nighttime hours are approximately equally 12 hours each. The spring equinox occurs between March the 19th through the 21st. The death and resurrection theme following the spring equinox can be traced back to 2000 BC in Babylon, 500 BC in Asia Minor, and 100 AD in Pagan Rome. The theme focuses on a god whose death and rebirth symbolize the death and rebirth of life during this time of year. Many pagan religions had gods who were depicted as dying and being reborn. Some gods like Attis, Osiris, and Dionysus, to name a few. As far as for Christians, they did not begin to celebrate Easter, which represents the death and resurrection of Jesus, until it was established in 325 AD by the First Council of Nicea, roughly 300 years after it supposedly happened, and 1700 years after the first celebration of Easter. This seems very suspect and intentional, rather than something that really happened. In addition, most religious historians believe that the elements of Easter were derived from pagan traditions, but Christians are steadfast on maintaining that Jesus' life and death is true and unrelated to earlier traditions. In light of all this evidence, I find it impossible to believe that the Christian story behind Easter was not plagiarized from earlier pagan beliefs that were an allegorical representation to try to explain astronomical events. Ancient Christians' response to this is that they claim that Satan had created counterfeit deities in advance of the coming of Christ in order to confuse humanity. Modern-day Christians generally regard the Attis legend as being a pagan myth of little value with no connection to Jesus. I think that they are correct. The Attis is a myth like Jesus, and that Attis has no connection to Jesus, but rather Jesus has a connection to Attis and other pagan gods. In addition, many Christians themselves admit that Easter is not a true Christian holiday. If it's not a true Christian holiday, then what is it? Is it a myth like the death and resurrection of Attis? However, the controversy surrounding Easter doesn't stop there. The Bible, the Holy Script that was not only inspired by the Spirit of God, but which has also been edited by man, is inconsistent with the event itself. If you open the Bible and compare the Gospels that recount the crucifixion and resurrection of Christ, the inconsistencies exist right there in plain text. Here are some summarizations of the resurrection and ascension of Christ to heaven. According to Matthew chapter 28, both Mary and Mary Magdalene went to the grave. There was a great earthquake upon the descending of an angel from heaven that removed the big stone from the door. The presence of the angel frightened the guards and killed them. When the woman appeared, the angel told them that he knew that they were looking for Jesus, but he had already risen. He then told them to go and tell the disciples to come and see where he once laid. That's all that Matthew said. According to Mark chapter 16, when the woman went to the grave, a man told them that Jesus had risen and to tell the disciples and Peter that he would show himself in Galilee. When Jesus had risen, he first appeared only to Mary Magdalene and casted out 7 devils. When the woman told the other disciples that Jesus has risen, they wept but didn't believe them when they told them that he was alive. Jesus then appeared to 2, and when they told it to the others, they still didn't believe them. Then he appeared to the 11 and told them to preach the gospel. He was then received into heaven by the right hand of God. According to Luke in chapter 24, no man was sitting in the grave to tell both of the Marys that Jesus had risen. Instead, 2 men in shining garments stood by them and reminded them of what Jesus had said to them in Galilee. The women were Mary Magdalene, and Johanna, and they remembered Jesus' words and told the 11 that he had risen, but he did not appear to them in the grave. Then Peter ran to the grave and found the white linen. Later on that day, Jesus appeared to the two, one of them whose name was Cleopas, who thought that Jesus was a stranger. Cleopas recounted to Jesus the crucifixion because he didn't know that he was talking to Jesus. Cleopas also said that woman had seen a vision of angels that had said that Jesus was alive. They continued to talk to Jesus, whom they did not recognize. When they sat down to eat, Jesus blessed and broke the bread, and that's when they recognized him. Then they went back to Jerusalem and found the 11 and told them that Jesus appeared to Simon. Then Jesus appeared to the 11 and frightened them. Jesus was hungry, so he asked for some food, and they gave him a piece of broiled fish. Jesus said, "Thus it is written, and thus it behoved Christ to suffer and to rise from the dead on the third day." As he was blessing them, he ascended into heaven. According to John chapter 20 through 21, only Mary Magdalene went to the grave and saw that the stone was taken away. She ran and told Simon Peter and the other disciples. There were no two men, like Luke recounted. The other Mary was not present, like Luke, Mark, and Matthew wrote. No angel or man, like Matthew and Mark stated. It was just Mary Magdalene. Peter and that other disciple went to the grave and found the linen that Jesus wore. So it was not just Peter that ran to the grave, it was Peter and another disciple. After they inspected everything, they went back home, but Mary stayed and began crying. Then two angels appeared. In Luke, there were two men in shiny garments. Perhaps these were the same two angels. But in Luke, there were three women, not one. The angels asked Mary why she was crying, and she replied in chapter 20, verse 13, because they had taken away my Lord. I know not where they laid him. But in Luke, they knew what had happened. In Luke chapter 24, verse 7 through 8, the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And they remembered his words. So, did she or didn't she know that he was resurrected? Did she have a case of amnesia and couldn't remember his words like Luke said she did? The story continues. Jesus was behind her, but she didn't recognize him. In Luke 3, three women were present. But they figured out he had risen when they remembered his sermon in Galilee, but Jesus did not appear to them. In John, only Mary Magdalene was present, and Jesus appeared to her, and she thought he was a gardener at first. After she recognized him, she went and told the disciples. Later on that night, Jesus appeared to disciples, and they were glad, not frightened like Luke had said. However, there were only 11 disciples because Thomas was absent, and he didn't believe the other disciples. Thomas said the only way he would believe it is if he was able to touch the wounds inflicted upon the cut in his side and the nails in his hands. 8 days later, Jesus reappeared to all 12 disciples and let Thomas touch him to make him believe. But in Luke chapter 20, verse 17, Jesus said to Mary, "Touch me not, for I am not yet ascended to my Father." But he allows Thomas to touch him. So the Gospels can't even get their story right. When you read the different accounts of what happened, you will notice that from Matthew to John, the story gets longer, and each story introduces new details that the other person didn't talk about. I believe this is the case of the authors reading the previous stories and editing it to make the new version what they wanted to say. I guess the main point of all of this is not only to show the inconsistencies in the Bible, but to use the sacred text as evidence to support the inconsistencies of their story around Easter. I have concluded that Easter is a pagan holiday that I will rightfully continue to celebrate. But it pisses me off how Christians have exploited a universal idea that recognizes astronomical events. Jesus is a myth, just like Krishna, Adonis, and Thor. If religious historians can agree that Easter in itself is based on pagan rituals, then what is the real story behind Jesus' resurrection? Isn't that part of the myth also? Well, that's all for now, and please give me your comments, your thoughts, and until next time, later.